إلى محادثة شيقة ترسم خارطة طريق استراتيجية لإعادة تموضع المنطقة العربية في الرقعة العالمية في ضوء إعادة التوازن بين القوى العالمية والإقليمية بسبب الاتفاق المبرم بين إيران ومجموعة ال5+1. أدعو صاحب السمو الملكي الأمير تركي الفيصل عضو مجلس إدارة بيروت انستيتيوت والرئيس المشارك، معالي وزير الداخلية والبلديات في الجمهورية اللبنانية نهاد المشنوق، الجنرال المتقاعد ديفيد بترايس عضو ورئيس مجلس إدارة معهد KKR عالمي، أيضا رئيس مجلس إدارة شركة نسيج ومجموعة صوليداريتي القابضة، الرئيس مشارك أيضا في قمة بيروت انستيتيوت خالد عبد الله جناحي، وأيضا البارونة فاليري آموس مديرة كلية الدراسات الشرقية والإفريقية للتفضل. أيضا مشرفة الجلسة السيدة راغدة درغام.
Let me start with you, Your Royal Highness. If I were to understand from you, what is it, the one single thing that you walked away with from this morning, the session, the 4 hours that you attended? Did you go in and with the same thought and go out with multiple thoughts? Or did you change your mind about what does it take to reconfigure the Arab region's global space because you had interaction with others from different parts of the world?
I came out with the view that we still have a long way to go before we can figure out how to solve our problems. And particularly in our part of the world, there are so many complicating factors and complicated factors that are engaged in what is happening internally and externally. And hopefully that the lack of leadership that is afflicting the situation and making it even more difficult will be resolved sooner rather than later. Whether I have enough confidence that that will happen or not, I don't. But I must live in hope.
But if there is to be a roadmap, the point is that it's nice to have ideals and hopes, and it's really commendable to keep on the positive note. But if you were to think of a roadmap for how to take this region out of a very difficult place where it's at, given the challenges, what would you practically suggest to start with, or at least to dream of? Because there has to be a roadmap. Who would draw that roadmap with you, if you will?
I think the whole world needs to draw that roadmap and to be committed to implementing it and not simply talk about it. Whether it is Palestine, whether it is Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Bahrain, Iran, the rest of the region's problems, the world seems to be talking a lot about these issues, but not willing to do enough.
Let me push you, Your Royal Highness, if you don't mind. Tell me about the responsibility of this region in impacting its own repositioning. Tell us about who needs to do what from this region, whether it is the country you come from, or whether it's the region as a GCC, or whether it is the Arab world altogether through, for example, the Arab League. What's the responsibility? What should we be doing? How do we reposition ourselves?
The GCC has taken the lead in many of these issues. And there are, within the Arab League, countries that have equally engaged in going forward and sharing the responsibility for doing things. Example, of course, is, as Abdulatif Zayani mentioned earlier, is the issue of Yemen, where there has been a concerted effort by a coalition of governments, not just within the region, but even outside the region, to meet the challenges in the Yemen. So there are live examples of what can be done to meet specific challenges. In other parts of the region, unfortunately, that require not just GCC and inter-Arab action, but also a concerted effort by the world community, there is not that commitment by the rest of the world, and I'm specifically referring to the situation in Syria. I think there was mention before about Russian participation in the coalition that is dealing with Daesh, which I prefer to call Fahish. The problem there is we're dealing with the symptom rather than with the disease. And the disease is in the failing state, like in Syria, the capital, that is where the disease is. It is because the capital is afflicted with the disease that you have the viruses coming out as represented by Fahish. Iraq equally so, Yemen also, Libya, because there is no strong state structure that can meet the challenges of not just Fahish but other issues of development and economic progress and so on. So let us concentrate on dealing with the disease, and that will take care of the symptoms of the disease.
I'm going to go to you, General Petraeus, because I'd like to tackle with you, if I may, how do you see the responsibility and the role from the outside world? And you come from the United States. And of course, we from this part of the world always somehow think it's done by America. It's done in the USA. Where would you take this conversation if you were to be a policymaker, decision maker, and you are a policymaker, and you are the type of person and intelligence that, if you are president, and you should be, where would you think that does this relationship need to get fixed?
Well, look, the responsibility, I think, in truth, starts with the citizens of the countries of the region, but it absolutely is shared by the citizens of the world. In some cases, those citizens or those leaders have a considerable obligation because in some cases they had a hand in the situation as it exists now. In others, there have been situations where I think there was the only option was one that had to be a coalition approach, but it inevitably led by the United States. Indeed, some of the issues, I think, in Syria have, in fact, at some point come about because of inaction. I think it's fairly widely agreed that there were options 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, that have been closed out now. And the situation has gotten vastly more complex, more complicated, with the latest ingredient being Russia entering the fray and saying that they're going after Daesh, but of course they're going after other forces as well, and really looking to shore up an individual who, in the eyes of many, is responsible for the deaths of 250,000 of his countrymen. These are barbaric, horrific situations. I've termed Syria a geopolitical Chernobyl that is spewing instability and violence and extremism and refugees, not just in the neighboring countries, though they are bearing the brunt of this, but in the region and indeed now, obviously, beyond that as well. And I think everyone has some responsibility in that regard, therefore.
Right. Let me follow up with you on this. So it's the inaction that contributed, like that's what I was hinting to when Jan Eliasson was on the stage, that many people believe that the inaction of the United States has led or contributed to the situation. But now with the action, clear action by Russia, do you think that's going to change the equation? Do you think that's going to say, listen, you're coming after my guys, and watch out, I'm
Sure.
going to get back to you and get yours, and that would mean military involvement by the U.S. directly to get the guys of Russia, meaning Bashar al-Assad?
Yeah, I, for one, don't see this as a particularly positive development, frankly. Let me back up a second, though, and just say that it is commonly said that there is no military solution to the problems of Syria. Okay, true, I'll accept that. But there has to be a military context created before there can be any meaningful diplomatic negotiations. I welcome the contribution earlier from the UN Deputy Secretary General and the discussions of trying to get to some diplomatic solution. But the fact is there has not been the military context that could actually lead to that could prompt the leaders in Damascus, for example, to seriously go to the table And I think frankly, Russia's intervention now will make that even more problematic and more difficult. I think there was a sense that perhaps the momentum was shifting, and it requires a shift in momentum on the battlefield. Again, you can't win or lose on the battlefield. You can lose on the battlefield. You can't win, but you sure have to create a context on that battlefield without which no diplomacy is going to be possible.
Minister Mashnouk, so this is next door to you, and if General Petraeus is right, there's going to be escalation because there has to be rebalancing of the military power on the ground. Next door to you, in a country that is going through a very difficult time, including restlessness by people, young people who said enough, really enough is enough. So how much do these developments in Syria, consequent to the escalation predicted, how much do they threaten Lebanon from your point of view?
أنا أفضل إني أجاوب بالعربي.
Okay, so can you, he's going to be responding in Arabic, so for those who need headsets, please. Okay,
لأنه الجواب حيكون أداء.
تفضل.
دراع التعبير.
Just 1 second, من فضلك حتى. Okay, are you ready? Okay, تفضل.
رح أبدأ بالحديث عن سوريا محل ما سمو الأمير والجنرال تحدثوا. الروس ما عملوا شيء مختلف. الروس عملوا كل اللي ما عملوه الآخرين، سواء من الجانب العربي أو من الجانب الأمريكي أو من أي جانب. وبالتالي الدور الروسي بسوريا أيا كان لا يمكن إلا أن يكون يعني وسيلة من وسائل الوصول لحل سياسي، لأنه بالتجربة القدرة الروسية على الاستمرار بالقصف دون وجود جيوش جدية قادرة على المواكبة وقادرة على تحقيق أي تقدم ما بتعني شيء. حد الأقصى للقيام فيه هو ما يفترض أنه يقوموا به الجيوش الأخرى في وقت سابق بعد سنوات. الاعتقاد أنه العمل الدبلوماسي لوحده هو اللي بيؤدي لنتيجة بدون عمل عسكري، أنا مع الجنرال بتريس أنه مش صحيح. العمل العسكري هو اللي بيؤدي لنتيجة دبلوماسية، والدليل استمرار الحرب و يعني استشهاد 4 مليون سوري حتى الآن وربما أكثر. لذلك إذا كان في تقصير فهو من الجانب الآخر، وإذا كان في خطأ فهو مش من الجانب الروسي. بقدر نتفق أنه نحن ندين العمل الروسي العسكري، إيه صحيح أكيد، ولكن ما في شك أنه كل القوى اللي معنية بمستقبل الشعب السوري أو كل العرب المعنيين بمستقبل الشعب السوري هن كانوا بينتظروا أنه يكون نفس العمل العسكري لدعم من جانب آخر. تأثير على لبنان، لبنان الوضع فيه تحت السيطرة، في قرار دولي وإقليمي أكيد بحماية الوضع بلبنان والحفاظ عليه بالحد الأدنى من الاستقرار. ولكن بصراحة التطورات الأخيرة وتعطيل الحياة الدستورية اللي عم يتأكد يوم ورا يوم إنه في تحالف سياسي تحميه، السياسة الإيرانية بطبيعة الحال، هو اللي رافض استعادة النظام السياسي اللبناني لنصابه الدستوري، بمعنى أن يكون هناك رئاسة جمهورية، رئيس جمهورية، وحكومة فاعلة، ومجلس نواب مفتوح للعمل والتشريع. هذه السياسة لن تتغير الآن. لذلك أنا لا أعتقد بأنه الاستقرار يستطيع أن يستمر طويلا كما عاش 1.5 سنة حتى الآن أو أكثر بقليل.
الاستقرار في لبنان لا تعتقد أنه سيستمر طويلا؟
لا، تحدث عن استقرار لبنان طبعا.
نعم.
لا أعتقد أنه سيستمر طويلا دون أن تستعيد المؤسسات الدستورية عملها، ولا أرى أن المؤسسات الدستورية ستستعيد عملها قريبا على الأقل.
يعني أنت كوزير داخلية تبدو وكأنك تقول لنا أن هذا البلد قادم إلى الانهيار.
أنا لا أستعمل كلمة انهيار، يعني هي كلمة كبيرة من موقعي ما بقدر أقول، ولكن أنا بقدر أقول بالتأكيد أنه الوضع السياسي وما يتبع ذلك أصلا من وضع اقتصادي، وبطبيعة الحال من وضع أمني ولو محدود، تحديدا أمني محدود. طبعا الوضع اللبناني سيشهد تدهورا في هذا الأمر.
سؤال آخر عن لبنان، مع أنني أريد أن أستكمل معك هذه الفكرة، ولكن دعني أعود إلى فكرة أخرى هي في أذهان الشباب. كنا نتحدث بعد الظهر عن دور وحقوق، أدوار وحقوق الشباب. الحركة الشبابية تقول كفانا فساد في هذا البلد، وليس فقط يعني من الطبقة السياسية، يقولون أن تلك الطبقة السياسية أفشلت هذا البلد، وأن تعطيل الدستور وتعطيل البرلمان وتعطيل الرئاسة، يعني أن من حقه أن يقول كفى. هل تعتقد أن من حقه أن يقول كفى؟
أولا أنا جاي شارك بندوة لها عنوان آخر اللي محدديه أنت بجدول الأعمال.
نعم، هي
لحظة سمحي لي كيف
هي
وبالتالي
خريطة الطريق إلى
أنا حجاوبك على السؤال، بس مش هذا الموضوع. مش هذا الموضوع اللي جايين على أساس.
مش مشكلة، إذا ما بدك تجاوب ما تجاوب.
لا حجاوب.
مش مشكلة
يا ست رغدة، أنا حجاوب.
تفضل.
بس عم بقول مش هذا الموضوع اللي أنا مشارك على أساس. خليني بس. النقطة الثانية، طبعا هي ما بتتعلق بالشباب بس، في كثير من اللبنانيين هو الخلاف مش هالعناوين المطروحة. لبنان دولة فيها فساد، ايه اكيد، يعني هذا الشيء معروف، بس لبنان مش لوحده اللي فيه فساد. الطبقة السياسية اللبنانية بعضها فاسد، وبالتأكيد مش كلها، التعميم لا يجوز ايا كان هذا التعميم، ايه اكيد موجود، ولكن في كثير من اللبنانيين بيعترضوا وبأيدوا هذه العناوين، ولكن ما بأيدوا الطريقة ابدا اللي عم تطرح فيها الامور والاسلوب. لأنه اسمحي لي، لأنه عمليا اللي عم بيصير فيه تعميم عام ظالم لكل البلد. نحن بلد الآن عم نعيش بظروف كتير صعبة. لما تيجي أنت تسقطي كل فكرة المؤسسة، لأنه هؤلاء الأشخاص كلهم هم المؤسسة الدستورية، بتكوني عم تعرضي البلد لأخطار لا الظرف يسمح فيها، ولا أنا ما عم بقول ما لازم يطالبوا، ما حدا يفهمني غلط. أنا عم بقول ما هو الوسيلة أو الأسلوب الأفضل للتأكيد على أن هذه المطالب محقة لكل اللبنانيين.
Baroness, I would like to come to you with, again, to each person on this panel, I come to them from their sort of background and expertise and where they come from in terms of experience. So you are someone who had dealt with one aspect, one very scary aspect of the crisis in Syria and other places, and that is the refugees and the human agony. And now it has, since you probably, I think since you left office, it has taken this new dimension of Europe panicking over the refugees crisis. So now when we look again at the issue at hand, which is the roadmap to reconfiguration, repositioning, what are we supposed to do, and what's Europe supposed to do about this? So that it's not only about getting in a couple of those guys or send them home. Should the Gulf states get more involved as they are criticized for not receiving them, or is this really not, is this a fallacy? Tell us your thoughts.
I have a rather harsh view of this. Firstly, I feel that there has been an ongoing failure of political leadership. I saw it when I was at the United Nations, and I've seen it since. I think that there has been a failure in terms of the accountabilities and responsibilities that countries sign up to as part of joining the United Nations and committing to the principles and the Charter of the United Nations. And I also think that 70 years on, what we are seeing is, and I'm a great believer in multilateralism, what I'm seeing is that if you create an organization, and within it, what you say is there has to be a commitment to the sovereignty of the state. And you don't take on board the implications in terms of the responsibilities that a state has to protect its own citizens, we end up with the kinds of situations that we have now. And so you see a situation where, for example, on average, someone who is fleeing as a refugee, on average, they will be 17 years away from their country. Now, what that means is the Refugee Convention that we have, which we're all extremely proud of, is not going to work anymore in those circumstances. Because if you say that people cannot work, if you don't have the mechanisms in place to support the countries that are taking in those refugees, and particularly neighboring countries, if you look at all of the data, it shows very, very, very clearly that people flee to the neighboring countries first, be it Lebanon, be it Jordan, be it Iraq or Turkey, as we've seen in Syria, in the past, in parts of the African continent, to Tanzania and elsewhere, putting huge pressure on countries that are already fragile. And it's only later on, when people see that the conflict in their particular country is taking a long time to resolve, do they then move further apart, for example, to Europe. And as a European, I'm ashamed of the response that we have seen from our continent, because we have put narrow domestic political concerns first. We have not, I'm not saying every country, we've all seen what Germany, Sweden and other countries have done, but we have put narrow domestic political considerations ahead of the duty that we have to people who have a great deal less than we do. So we need to reform the architecture as a matter of urgency,
Who should
while
share in that?
while
Who is
staying
the
committed
Baroness,
to issues of accountability and responsibility.
Well, accountability and responsibility is a huge thing that's being shoved under the rug these days because of the priority of stability.
But everybody has signed up to it. But they're not holding each other accountable. I mean, that's part of being a member of the United Nations.
Do you think that this crisis that has hit Europe, that Europe is feeling now, do you think it may be a catalyst for a new approach for the resolution of the Syrian crisis? Or do you think once they tackle this one and take care of it, it will be back to business as usual?
Well, my fear is that the focus now is on a refugee crisis and its impact on the European Union. In another box are the overarching security concerns that people have about the spread of violent extremism. And this issue of causes and solutions is not being addressed in terms of the totality. Of course it's complex. But one of the constraints that exists, I think, is that countries at different times are taking a lead in seeking to find a solution, and that this is not happening at the same time to give the kind of added value and the push that is required to come up with a solution. So the United Nations, and when I say United Nations, I don't mean the member states, but the as it were, the international civil service part of the United Nations tries to push member states and the whole mechanism to move forward, but it's been incredibly difficult because of the power of member states and the different ways and the paralysis that we have seen as a result of the tensions between member states.
Khalid Janahi, from your vantage point as a businessman, the corporate social responsibility, when we are thinking of whether it is the crisis of the refugees or whether it is how do we help reposition the Arab region globally, I think quite often the private sector talks a lot and ducks more often than it delivers. Why is that private sector in this region almost always, not almost, but quite often ducking or just waiting to be in good place with the rulers instead of really pushing the envelope and playing the role they should in social corporate responsibility?
Thank you very much.
And that's important for repositioning,
Yeah,
just to make sure for
thank you
Mr.
very much.
Mashnouk that it's still in the same thing.
First of all, I fully agree with you that General should be the President of the United States.
Oh, good.
And I add to it that Donald Trump should be as Vice President. That'll be a good combination for the country there, and you do a good job, both of you together. I think I loved the presentation of Ken earlier on.
Thank you.
I think this brings it to us when you really think about it, just thinking what the hell is going on around us. That there is a major deficit on our treasuries. At leadership level across the world, what's happening today in Syria, I mean, His Royal Highness, so many, 3 or 4 years ago, it's been said and said and said, that the deficit of lack of wisdom for what's going on. And we come back after 4 years. It looks like 4 years ago, we could have done the same thing. We could have had the Russians in, and we played this game, and only say 10,000 people dead. We'd not have more than 10,000 refugees. Now, after nearly 300,000 will be dead by the time we go through this, we'll be back to square one where we were 4 years ago. This is a real shame on the world leadership as a whole. Not just the region, the full world, including the United Nations. I mean, we all actually sit back here and say, why the hell this is going on? Now, you bring the issue of the business community across the world. I mean, the refugee issue, you watch it on television, you listen to Theresa May, you listen to everybody, and you say, oh, and suddenly everybody talks about Hungary, everybody talks about what happened in other countries in Europe. And to be sorry, as an Arab, I say, before we look at those guys, let's look at ourselves. What are we doing, apart from just paying a bit of money, okay, to basically build schools or add something to the refugee camps in Lebanon and Jordan or wherever? We're not doing anything really from a value perspective. We're not creating anything, and we are expecting the Europeans to do so. So, as a business guy, I have a problem with that. I have a problem with that, and I should actually be pushing. I'm talking about putting my head is in the sand, but get my head out, and I have to push the leadership in the region as a whole actually to be more value-based rather than just sitting back and just putting some money to keep the thing away and let it go somewhere else. So I think that's an important factor. But you got to look at what His Royal Highness said. Let's look at the symptoms and the causes of where we are today. As Arabs, this morning we're talking about, we actually commissioned a study as an Arab Business Council years back in 2004 looking at intertrade in the Arab world. And we had only 7% in the Arab world in trade. Today, that runs at 5.5%. So when we talk about all this business that we Arabs should do something, before we really talk the big talk, let's do something in reality. I mean, I've been listening today to a lot of talk on this issue. And as our brethren say in Sudan, kalam sakit, it's not getting us anywhere.
Well,
let's do something where we deliver on bits rather than talk too much and we deliver nothing.
Well, this is
so
exactly
I think we have to stand and do something as
this
business
is exactly
community
what the business
and
community
everybody
should do,
else.
stand up and get counted and do something. But let me now open this up a little bit for the panel. So it's, whenever you want to come in, just sort of tell me you will. Let me ask you, Prince Turki, do you think it's possible at all that this region could reposition at all if we do not resolve the crises that are flaring, and 3 of them in particular, or basically no more. We're talking about Yemen, Syria, we're talking about Libya, and we're talking about Iraq. Thank you, that's I knew I was missing.
That's 4.
4, as I meant to say. Okay, let's count them again. General, count them with me. You know them.
Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Libya.
Okay, and for now, that's for now. So could we really... Palestine. But could we really reposition, can we think of repositioning at all, really, seriously, realistically? If there is no new way at it to resolve these issues out of the box, not just the good old ways that failed? Is there something else we can do to break the deadlock?
There has to be something that we can do to break it. I do not accept the proposition that these issues and problems are insurmountable. And with all of the goodwill that we can muster around the Arab world and throughout the world community, we should have the ability to meet these difficulties in all of these countries and in the region in general. And we shouldn't wait to reconfigure ourselves before we take on these challenges. There are things that can be done in Syria, and we should continue to pursue what can be done in Syria, Iraq equally.
Let's stop at this, the new developments with Syria. Is there now, despite the military escalation, could that become an opportunity for, or was there, quite honestly, you were in New York, and there was a lot of behind-the-scenes meetings, and we understand there may be a new approach to Syria, one that might be about not secret necessarily, but sort of silent understandings that would distinguish between the regime and the president, the man. Is this part of the escalation, General Petraeus, as well? Think about it while Prince Turki entertains this. Is this an opportunity in you, maybe window, through the military escalation in order to find a solution?
Sadly, I think it actually adds to the complexity. I think it also emboldens Bashar al-Assad. It gives him new confidence at a time when, frankly, he was starting to feel the heat again very much. Again, if you ask what context is necessary for people to negotiate, there has to be a change in the momentum on the battlefield. And that momentum was beginning to change. Now that I think that is reversed most likely, and it may well prolong the conflict rather than speed the time to the negotiating table.
So you seem not to agree with those who think this escalation by Russia could become the Afghanistan, the Afghanistan for Russia, that they would be, they would pay a price eventually.
Well, no, I think there is a distinct potential for Russia to sustain casualties and very substantial costs and all the rest of that. What I'm merely getting at is that it doesn't further the conditions that would lead individuals to go to the negotiating tables. Besides that, it's also damaging the very forces, the remaining forces that can stave off the extremism in the Sunni Arab community in Syria. And I think that's a huge threat, again, not just to Syria, but obviously to the neighbor Iraq and to the other countries in the region where we see Daesh also trying to establish beachheads.
The backlash from what is happening in our part of the world affects us all. The more extremism takes hold, the more we will be the victims of that extremism. Russia cannot be excluded from that. There are citizens of Russia fighting in Syria, perhaps in Iraq as well, and they're not all going to be killed by Russian aircraft. Some of those will be able to return to Russia, and they will seek to do harm to Russia, as the Saudis who are fighting in Syria do come back to us and try to do harm in Saudi Arabia and in other places like that. So unless and until we get a communal and a worldwide effort to put a stop to the killing, and we have the means to do that, military, political, and otherwise, then all of us are going to be the victims of what is happening today.
What should the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia do? What should Washington do, to both of you? And before I move on to others, what should be done now?
We've been cooperating with the United States for years on these issues, and I think one of the main I wouldn't say differences, but using an alternative tactic from each other. The concentration on simply dealing with Fahish in Syria is a mistake. We should deal, as I said, with the disease in Damascus.
Yeah.
And by doing that, you fix Fahish. And as there was the attempt to do it in Baghdad, when Nouri al-Maliki allowed the situation in Iraq to become what it did, the world community got together and brought down Nouri al-Maliki. And he was replaced by someone who hasn't yet shown any capacity to do much to overcome the deficits that Nouri al-Maliki left behind him, but action was taken. And it was concerted action. It was the Saudis, the Americans, the British, the Europeans, the Iranians, but more importantly, it was the Iraqi people that allowed that.
Bitakid Said. I agree. And with respect to Syria, Bashar al-Assad cannot be part of the solution in the future. Now, this is not to say that he should be pushed out precipitously until we have a sense of what will follow, because Syria, as horrible and barbaric and devastating as the situation is in humanitarian terms and all other respects, could actually get worse. But having said that, there's no way that the individual who is the magnetic attraction for individuals who feel that what he has done to the Sunni Arab and other communities in Syria, the Kurds as well, and others, he, again, cannot be part of the long-term solution there. The Russian intervention, I think, probably emboldens him for some time. Could be said perhaps they have an idea, as Sina said, of splitting the individual from the regime, and there could be some way forward there, but you're still left with Daesh, and also with Jabhat al-Nusra, for that matter, the al-Qaeda affiliate. I strongly believe that the elements that can deal with Daesh have to be supported more effectively, that they and those in their area have to be protected from whatever it is that attacks them. If barrel bombs continue to drop on their heads from Bashar's Air Force, we should ground his Air Force, and we have the capability to do that. Again, they have to be protected. People will ultimately give up hope, and that's when they leave. It's not in the initial years. It's only now when they've just completely been rendered hopeless by the situation, and there has to be an injection of some hope into at least portions of the north and the south. One could sketch those out as a beginning, as a departure point, but that implies a considerable amount of support and a degree of commitment and action that has not been forthcoming so far.
You still haven't told me what you think Washington should do.
Can I just pick up on this point about not giving up hope? Because I think that one of the challenges we have, given the complexity of these situations on the ground, is that so we're now focusing on how do you get the fighting to stop? And we've been trying for 4 years to get the fighting to stop. So while you're doing that, you also have to be doing other things to, as the Deputy Secretary General said in his remarks, to find ways of building confidence across communities. And I think part of the challenge that we have is that as the complexity increases, we tend to focus on one issue to the detriment of others. And a major challenge we have is to try to keep not to have a one-dimensional view of this, but to have several different things going at the same time, which is helping to build and grow that confidence that demonstrates that there can be a different way.
I know you have two fingers up because I want to give Nahad Mashnouq the opportunity. Please, go ahead.
Yeah, there's, again, don't cast this purely as a military activity that I'm talking about here. This is about creating a safe haven, an enclave in which you not only have security, which is obviously the critical foundation for everything else, but where you can get local governance going again. You can get schools to reopen. You can get basic services reestablished. And again, give the people some hope, give some sense of what right looks like, a vision for how this could expand over time, even as you now have a force that is capable and can, again, as I said, start to change the context, without which you will not get to the negotiating table, and without which you won't defeat Daesh either.
Mr. Minister, please comment on the conversation.
Yes. Basically, I mentioned this in this morning's session, everybody is talking about helping the Syrian people. But who is asking the Syrian people what do they want? There hasn't been anybody contacting the average Syrian about what he wants. This is an idea that I had the pleasure with Sheikh Mohammed al-Sabah and His Excellency, the Secretary General of the Arab League, Amr Moussa, and Ibrahim al-Khatib from Jordan to write about, which is, let us go to the Syrian people and ask them what they want. We in Saudi Arabia, the GCC states, the Europeans, the Americans, the Russians, even Bashar al-Assad says, I want the best for the Syrian people. But nobody's asking the Syrian people. So, and there are ways of reaching the Syrian people if there is a will in the world community to do that. And in order to do that, there has to be a commitment, first, to establishing a ceasefire in Syria to stop the killing. And whoever doesn't agree with that will have to face military sanction. Hence the general's idea that there must be a military context or a political context within which the military has a role to play. And then you go to the towns and villages in Syria, to the social makeup in Syria, whether it is labor unions, whether it is tribes, whether it is government structures, etc., to select representatives from there and have them join in a conference that will decide the future of Syria and bypass all the controversial and in many cases criminal leaderships of the various groups that are operating in Syria, whether it is Bashar al-Assad and his minions or some of the terrorist groups that are operating there, and simply go directly to the Syrian people.
Minister Masnou, I give you the floor to add. I'm sure you want to come in on this conversation, so the floor is yours.
صراحة أنا لا أنتظر أي تطور جدي في الموقف الأمريكي أو في الموقف الأوروبي في المدى المنظور تجاه سوريا أو تجاه أي من المناطق الأربعة التي ذكرت سابقا، سواء ليبيا أو العراق أو سوريا أو المنطقة الوحيدة اللي ممكن يصير فيها تطور هي اليمن بسبب عاصفة الحزم، بمعنى أن هناك نواة صلبة عربية بدأت بالسعودية وأكملت بوجود عسكري مصري، ودولة الإمارات يعني قدمت شهداء، ودولة قطر ساهمت. بصرف النظر عن التقييم العسكري، أنا لست خبيرا عسكريا، ولكن بالتأكيد القرار السياسي بالتحرك تجاه اليمن كان قرار عربي، وكان يعني أدى لنتيجة ما، وواضح أنه ممكن يؤدي لنتيجة بمعنى الوصول إلى حل سياسي. ما بعتقد أنه الوضع الآن هو وضع احتلال دول لدول أخرى. كل الأعمال العسكرية تهدف إلى الوصول إلى استنتاج سياسي أو إلى حل سياسي. كوني لا أرى أن التدخل الدولي وارد على الأقل بالمدى المنظور بالدول الثلاث الباقية فضلا عن اليمن يعني، ولكن أرى أنه لابد من قيام نواة صلبة عربية بمنطق استراتيجي. يعني لما نتحدث عن دول مجلس التعاون، هل تستطيع دول مجلس التعاون وحدها أن تعمل توازن عسكري بوحدة من دول النزاع؟ ما بعتقد هذا الأمر ممكن. يعني بطبيعة التوازنات العسكرية أي توازن سياسي أو عسكري أو حتى استراتيجي لا يمكن إلا أن يقوم بين دول مجلس التعاون، وعلى رأس السعودية بطبيعة الحال، وبين مصر، رغم الخلاف على دور مصر ورغم الخصوصية المصرية والخصوصية السعودية وربما خصوصية دول خليجية أخرى أعضاء في مجلس التعاون. ولكن لن يقوم توازن عربي في المنطقة لا في السياسة ولا في العسكر دون تحالف استراتيجي بين دول مجلس التعاون تحديدا وبين مصر، رغم برجع بقول حساسيات أو الأطباع المختلفة بين الدول. تجربة عاصفة الحزم هي يعني تجربة مبدئية لا يمكن القول بأنها مكتملة بحيث التعاون الاستراتيجي، ولكن ممكن تطويرها لمعالجة أي أمر آخر سواء في سوريا أو في أي دولة أخرى على قاعدة التعاون الاستخباري، على قاعدة الجدي مش الشفهي، التعاون العسكري الجدي، التنسيق السياسي الجدي، هذا ممكن يؤدي لنتيجة.
خالد جناح يريد أن يعلق كلامك، تفضل.
Well, I think the issue of, I mean, you said it in a very nice way, in a few words. In the back rooms in New York, the discussions and everything else, the narrative has changed. The narrative of Bashar al-Assad has to go. Now we're talking about Bashar al-Assad is going to eventually go for a final solution in the country. So this is going to be the future, and the Europeans are very much on that. I mean, the Russians are not there for nothing. They are there, and they will deliver. But I would like to bring in actually what Sheikh Nahyan said and bring it together about the youth and the bulge of the youth in the Arab world. And the unemployment of the youth in the Arab world is the largest, over 15% anywhere in the world. Meanwhile, we have the oil prices going down. They're never going to come back to where they were before. So you've got all these other elements, and we have a new, well, we have the geography, and he's not here. The geography and the history is back on the table again. Iran will be back on the table, and they will be there. So, and by the way, as a businessman, I feel really bad and sick where Americans and the Russians and the Germans and the Brits are sitting there doing business whilst we, the Arabs, our hands off, and they are our next door neighbor. Eventually, we basically go and follow up afterwards. But I think it's important that we don't just focus on one thing, and we've got to bring in the full thing in, the effect of the youth in the future. I think my worry is, as again, I'm going to use Ken Lee's words with regards to, you don't want robots to work for you. And you don't want to work for robots either. And unfortunately, what I see is that we are working for robots. I'm talking about the bulge of the people and the youth. And that, when actually eventually it comes at you, it will come very, very hard at you. So I think we need to think of that, because the next Bashar al-Assad could be anywhere else in the Arab world, the way things are going. With the economic downturn globally and in this part of the world, very much so. And all, by the way, all the people from Goldman Sachs going downwards and from over going upwards, they will tell you that the oil prices will not reach to where they were in the past in the next 3 years. And I'm sure KKR say the same thing. So, I mean, even some actually say it's going to be a $20 a barrel. Now, how are you going to look after Egypt with its problems? How are you going to look after Yemen with its problems? How are you going to look after the rest of the world, the Arab world, with their problems? With that wealth, which we did have, and of course, we see it in the papers and everywhere else. Saudi Arabia, they've taken 70 billion out of their, this is the papers, 70 billion out of their reserves. Surely here they will do the same in the future, because that is going to deplete your reserves. Yes, you can borrow money, but you're going to borrow money based on what? Because you're going to have so much commitment. So we've got to think more on the bigger picture, what the hell we're going to do for the future of this part of the world, the youth, which is the real thing that we look after. And I think it's too much politics and too little wisdom, unfortunately, it's coming out of this. So the wisdom
Stop
is...
criticizing this panel. We have just
No, I'm not talking about this panel. God forbid. I'm talking
Lots
about...
of people spoke
I'm
wisely
talking
so far.
I'm talking about the world leadership as a whole, I think, and the people themselves. The wisdom is missing, because we are going round and round to maintain positions that we're killing people, we're having refugees, we're having other problems, but meanwhile, can we afford it financially in long term to have a sustainable, the word sustainable development? We've been, we and I were discussing this, we've been in this part of the world for 70 years, okay, working on an equation which is really awful equation. General will like it. It's basically been security brings stability, brings development. That's nonsense. Economic development brings stability and it brings you security. And once, the quicker that we learn that wisdom to do it, the better we all are, the quicker we're going to solve the Syrian things, the quicker we're going to solve other problems.
I know you want to answer.
In reality, what happens, and I think, is that an incremental development, say in security, as Dr. Barham and I experienced in Iraq, enables maybe an economic benefit, which brings better information, which enables better military, which enables the shops to reopen, which allows the schools to, so you're either spiraling upward. So it's not like this, it's a spiral where one reinforces the other with some bumps along the way, or you're spiraling downward. And the spiral downward is very hard to arrest, as we saw in Iraq, and tragically as we're seeing in Iraq again now. And if I could use that to get to Iraq, because the place where I was privileged to spend 4 years of my life remains very much on my mind and in my heart, as they say. And the key element in the resolution of Iraq, once again, is really a situation where the center of gravity is in Baghdad. It's not on the front lines of the fight against Daesh. Don't get me wrong. You have to keep pushing Daesh back. You've got to liberate Ramadi. You've got to liberate Fallujah, Mosul, and all the rest of that. I think that is doable, but none of that will be sustainable, probably not even achievable, if you don't resolve the political challenges that reside in Baghdad. If you cannot get to inclusive politics, if you can't get to better governance, I think then the Balad al-Rafidain has a very, very tough road ahead. But I think it can be done, and I think that a lot of the countries that are represented right here all need to double down on their efforts in supporting those in Baghdad who are pursuing the path of inclusion as opposed to those who want to return to the path of exclusion, which is what brought us to the tragic situation we're in Iraq right now.
Your Highness, go ahead, because I'm going to go to Baroness afterwards.
One thing we haven't talked about is why is Fahish such a success in attracting so many young people? Is it just an issue of novelty? Is it the attraction of seemingly, although most of it on YouTube, a successful revolutionary movement that is upsetting the accepted order in a region? Is it the speech that they use to convince young people to join them, and perhaps even older people to join them? That is something that needs also to be dealt with, and not just the fixing of the disease, as I mentioned, in Damascus and Baghdad and Sana'a and Tripoli. And that has also to be a collective effort. Anything that contributes to allowing these people to attract young people, using social media, for example, YouTube, Twitter, Snapchat, and I don't know what other means are at their disposal to do that. There have to be controls on that. I know there are people who talk about free speech and such high-sounding values and words, but if we don't prevent these people from reaching the young ones who are susceptible to being drawn by them, then we will have also failed and allowed for them to reach them when we can't reach them ourselves. That is something I think that needs attention as well from the world community.
I want to go to Baroness Valerie Amos, because she's now heading a very important university in London, right? It's inside London. And so it follows through from what Prince Turki said, and then tie it to me, if you will, with the frustration of many young people in this part of the region who do not understand the nature of realignments or alignments, or again, in a pivot away from this region, and for example, pivot towards Iran and not towards the Arab world. There's a lot of confusion. What should London do? And I want General Petraeus to still tell me, what should Washington do now? So I take it to both of you, but starting with Baroness, telling me from your side as the other part of this equation, where do you start? What do you do?
Well, I'm going to start by, I'm afraid, Prince Turki, disagreeing with you on your last point. Because I do feel that if we drive the conversation and the debate underground, we make it worse. And I feel that we have to create the conditions that enable the debate and that we have to win the argument. And that we have to win the argument on the basis of the values and the principles that we consider to be important. And if we're not able to do that, and what we do is to shut down the avenues for debate, then I think we've lost before we've even begun. And as someone who is now running a university, I feel that very, very powerfully. We have a situation now in the United Kingdom where, as part of its strategy to tackle violent extremism, and it's not that I'm saying that there should not be a strategy to tackle violent extremism, the UK government has put in place what it's calling a prevent strategy, with a responsibility on universities, for example, to monitor and so on. My university was picked out a week or so ago as a university that's promoting extremism. But when we challenged this and asked if anything that had been said by any speaker on our campus was against the law, the answer was no. There was nothing that had been said by any speaker.
But the nuance is important as to against the law and promoting extremism.
That was against the law, or indeed had those speakers promoted extremism, because they had come, for example, there was one speaker mentioned who had come to speak on a very narrow issue of religious theology. So just by saying X or Y individual is promoting extremism, rather than looking at the basis on which they are speaking in a university, is very, very dangerous ground. And at SOAS, we're very proud that we are open to debate and discussion. This is not to say that we don't have a responsibility and a duty of care to ensure that the promotion is not happening. And I think we will have a responsibility to be aware of that. On your point about what should London be doing, by that do you mean what should the British government be doing, or something else?
Yes.
Obviously, as a member of the Security Council, Britain has a key role and responsibility in terms of those 5 permanent members in seeking to work together. And we have seen, for example, on the chemical weapons issue, what happens when the 5 members of the Security Council are able to work together. And we've seen in other parts of the world the difference that it can make when those 5 members of the
but the question is actually different, because the question is actually when it was necessary to work on the chemical weapons, the other part of the equation was dropped badly and it hurt the Syrian people. But that's not the point. The point I'm asking you, it seems that there's been a clear decision by major powers, including the UK, to embrace Iran really very clearly, and to do or to step away from this traditional relationship with the peoples of the Arab region.
I don't think it has to be.
It is perceived that way, at least.
It's perceived that way. My personal view is that it isn't and should not be either or. I think it has to be both and. I think that Iran has to be part of the solution. That pressure needs to be kept on Iran to act responsibly. And if you look at the situation in Syria, if you look at the situation in Yemen, if you look at what is happening in Lebanon, if you look at a whole number of different country-specific situations, then there is a role that Iran is playing and a responsibility which we should keep on the Iranian government to be responsible.
Chair Petraeus, I have a couple of minutes left, so please go ahead. And
Sure.
again, you are very well aware of this
Sure.
feeling.
I think that's a misperception, frankly, what you described. Maybe
What is the
founded
what is the
that
misperception?
You described a sense that a totally different approach to Iran. The Iran nuclear agreement is about the Iran nuclear program. It has some positive elements and it has some problematic elements. It very much sets back for the near term, the 10 to 15-year period of the agreement, the ability of Iran to enrich, provides for greater inspections, it reduces the centrifuges, it ends the plutonium path to the bomb, a number of positive elements in that part of the agreement. But there are some problematic elements. A country with roughly a $500 billion GDP per year is about to get a gift of $50 billion when its assets are frozen around the world, at least, maybe more than that, going to get reintegrated into the global economy. And many of us fear that that will provide funding. Let's not forget that Iran is one of 3 states in the world designated as a state sponsor of terror. And the Quds Force, Lebanese Hezbollah, and Hamas are elements in that apparatus. So I think, actually, you asked what should Washington do. I told our Congress this the other day in testimony, that I felt that the Congress and the President together should be crystal clear in stating that Iran will never be allowed to enrich to weapons grade, and if it does, the U.S. will prevent them from doing so. And nothing would reassure our Gulf states more than that kind of statement at a moment like this.
I beg to differ. I think the priority of the Arab states, and it's exactly what Minister Mashnouk mentioned earlier, it is about the different, separate, continued, multiplied roles of Iran in Arab lands, in Arab countries. And what he said is he feels that the U.S. will not do a thing about it.
Oh, no, and the second part of what I said was that there should be, in some cases, a reinvigoration or an establishing anew of a regional approach. Again, countries of the region central to that, but the U.S. certainly adding considerable to it, that will deal with any continued Iranian adventurism, mischief, support of terrorist activities or whatever. Mm-hmm. I think those 2 elements are critical to the way forward.
I have to give the last word to Prince Turki because he is definitely someone who is on the board of directors of Beirut Institute, and he certainly deserves the last word in this panel. I kept you too long, so forgive me. Please go ahead.
Well, I'm glad I'm practicing my prerogatives at Beirut Institute. Time is up, and as you said, I'm having the last word, and the last word is Palestine. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.